At my wedding, my grandfather said, "Remember, your body belongs to your husband now." The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor, sending golden liquid and crystal shards across my wedding dress train, while 200 guests turned to stare. My grandfather stood at the microphone, that satisfied smile on his face like he'd just given me the most precious wisdom, completely unaware he'd just detonated a bomb in the middle of my reception. "What did you just say?" My voice carried across the sudden silence of the ballroom, and I watched my new husband Daniel's face drain of color as he realized what was happening. "I said your body belongs to your husband now, sweetheart. It's tradition, the way marriage has worked for thousands of years." Grandfather adjusted his navy medal on his jacket, standing straighter like he was defending freedom itself. "Your grandmother understood this, God rest her soul. She never denied me once in 63 years. The microphone feedback screeched, but not as loud as my Aunt Patricia's gasp from table 3, where she sat with her mouth hanging open in horror. Daniel stepped forward, reaching for my hand, but I was already moving toward the stage where grandfather stood. My mother tried to intercept me, whispering frantically about not making a scene, but I brushed past her, my heels clicking against the floor like gunshots. "Grandpa, we need to talk about this privately," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But he waved me off with that dismissive gesture I'd seen him use on waitresses and store clerks my whole life. "Nothing private about marriage wisdom, Melissa. These young people need to hear the truth about commitment." He turned back to the crowd, warming to his topic. "Women today think marriage is a partnership of equals, but that's not what biology intended. A wife's body is designed to serve her husband's needs, to bear his children, to maintain his household. It's not oppression, it's nature's order." My cousin Rebecca stood up from table 7, her pregnant belly prominent in her bridesmaid dress. "Grandpa, you're embarrassing yourself. Stop talking." But he just laughed, that condescending chuckle that meant he thought we were being hysterical females. "See, this is what I mean. No respect for elder wisdom anymore. Rebecca, your husband should teach you when it's appropriate to speak at formal events." Rebecca's husband Thomas actually laughed nervously, then caught her death glare and quickly looked down at his plate. The DJ had turned off the music, and now the only sound was the fountain in the corner and my grandmother's sister Eleanor clearing her throat repeatedly from the head table. She was 91 and had that look on her face like she was about to reveal family secrets we'd all regret hearing. "Robert?" Eleanor's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Shut your ignorant mouth before I tell everyone what your precious wife really thought about your marriage." Grandfather turned red, his hand gripping the microphone stand. "Don't you dare speak ill of Margaret, Eleanor. She was a perfect wife." Eleanor's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Perfect? She planned to leave you in 1973, had the divorce papers drawn up and everything." The revelation sent whispers rippling through the crowd. I stood frozen between the tables, watching my family's careful facade crumble in real time. Daniel appeared at my elbow, speaking quietly. "Should we stop this?" But I couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the fact that my grandfather was ruining my wedding with his prehistoric views, and apparently, my grandmother had wanted to escape him. "That's a lie," grandfather sputtered. But Eleanor was already pulling papers from her purse, yellowed documents she'd apparently been carrying for decades waiting for this moment. "Divorce petition, dated March 15th, 1973. Margaret Louise Brennan versus Robert James Brennan. Grounds, physical and emotional cruelty." She waved the papers in the air. I talked her out of it because divorce was social suicide back then. Biggest regret of my life. My father finally seemed to snap out of his shock and climbed onto the stage, gently but firmly taking the microphone from grandfather's hands. "Dad, that's enough. You're done speaking." But grandfather wasn't finished. He raised his voice to carry without amplification. "This is what feminism has done. Destroyed the sacred institution of marriage. Made women think they can deny their husbands, pursue careers instead of motherhood, act like men instead of ladies." "I'm a neurosurgeon," I said, my voice loud and clear. "I spent 12 years in training. I save lives. And my body belongs to no one but me." The words hung in the air, and I saw several older relatives shift uncomfortably. Uncle Stephen was nodding along with grandfather, while his wife Linda stared at her hands. Their daughter Caitlin, fresh out of law school, stood up slowly. "Actually, Grandpa, marital rape has been illegal in all 50 states since 1993. A spouse's body doesn't belong to their partner. That's called slavery." Caitlin's voice was steady, lawyer-like, but her hands were shaking. "And Mom," she turned to Linda, "you don't have to stay with someone who agrees with this. You have options." Stephen stood up so fast his chair fell backward. "Don't you dare talk to your mother about our marriage. She's happy. Aren't you, Linda?" All eyes turned to Linda, who sat perfectly still for a long moment. Then quietly, "No, I haven't been happy in 20 years." The admission seemed to surprise her as much as anyone, like the words had escaped without permission. The reception hall erupted. Stephen started yelling at Caitlin for poisoning his wife's mind. Grandfather was ranting about the destruction of traditional values. Eleanor was reading more excerpts from grandmother's divorce petition, each one more damning than the last. Physical intimidation, financial control, forced isolation from friends. The picture she painted of my grandparents' perfect marriage was nightmarish. Daniel took the microphone from my father. "Everyone, please. This is our wedding day. Can we please?" But his own father, Richard, stood up from table 2. "Actually, I think Robert has a point. Women have gotten too independent. My first wife left me because I expected her to actually act like a wife." Daniel's mother, Grace, Richard's third wife, went pale. "Richard, we discussed this. You promised you'd changed." "I have changed," Richard insisted. "I don't hit anymore." The casual admission sent another shockwave through the room. Grace stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked toward the exit. "Grace, don't be dramatic," Richard called after her. "See? This is exactly what Robert means. No loyalty anymore." She stopped at the door and turned back. "I'm 43 years old. I've wasted 6 years trying to fix you. Not one more day." My maid of honor, Jessica, grabbed the microphone. "Okay, I think what we're learning here is that a lot of you have really messed up marriages. But this is Melissa and Daniel's day. and they don't believe any of this Stone Age bullshit. So either shut up or leave. Her directness cut through the chaos momentarily, but grandfather wasn't done. This is my granddaughter's wedding. I have a right to give marital advice. He looked directly at me. Melissa, sweetheart, I'm trying to save your marriage before it starts. Men have needs. If you deny your husband, he'll find someone who won't. Daniel stepped forward then, and I'd never seen him genuinely angry before. Are you threatening my wife? On our wedding day? Are you actually telling her I'll cheat if she ever says no to sex? I'm telling her the truth about male nature, grandfather replied, that patronizing tone never wavering. Young man, you might think you're different, but when she's tired from work and rejecting you night after night, you'll understand. A man can only take so much denial before he seeks relief elsewhere. Daniel's younger sister Amy, all of 19 and usually silent at family events, suddenly laughed. Wow, just wow. So you're saying men are basically animals with no self-control? That's actually more insulting to men than women. She looked at her brother. Danny, please tell me you don't believe this garbage. Daniel's response was immediate. Of course not. Consent isn't optional just because we're married. But Richard, still stinging from Grace's departure, jumped in. That's what your generation doesn't understand. Marriage is consent. The ring is consent. The vows are consent. When a woman says I do, she's agreeing to be a wife in all ways. Amy turned on her father. Dad, that's literally rape culture. You're describing rape culture at my brother's wedding. Don't you use that feminist propaganda with me, young lady? Richard shot back. I'm paying for your college education. Amy stood up straighter. Actually, Mom is. From the divorce settlement from husband number 2, you haven't contributed a dime. The revelation that Amy knew about the financial arrangements clearly shocked Richard. My mother finally found her voice. Daddy, please. You're ruining Melissa's wedding. Whatever you believe, can't you keep it to yourself for one day? Grandfather turned on her with surprising venom. You're one to talk, Patricia. Divorced twice, living like a teenager at 55. What kind of example is that for your daughter? A good one, I said loudly. Mom left men who didn't respect her. She taught me I deserved better than being someone's property. I looked around the room at my family and Daniel's, at friends and colleagues. And if anyone here thinks my body belongs to anyone but me, you can leave right now. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Uncle Stephen stood up, pulling at Linda's arm. Come on, we're going. Linda didn't budge. No, I'm staying for my niece's wedding. You can go. Stephen's face turned purple. You're my wife. You leave when I leave. Linda pulled off her wedding ring and set it on the table. Not anymore. The exodus began. Stephen stormed out. Richard followed, but not before telling Daniel he was making a huge mistake marrying a career woman. Several older couples left quietly, whether in protest or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. Grandfather stood at the microphone stand, looking smaller somehow, abandoned by his supporters. This is what happens when women forget their place, he said to no one in particular. Eleanor stood up, using her cane for support. Robert, Margaret's place was in medical school. Did you know that? She got accepted to Harvard Medical in 1951, but her father made her marry you instead. She could have been a doctor, saved lives, made a difference. Instead, she spent 60 years serving you dinner and pretending to be happy. The truth hit me like a physical blow. My grandmother, who I'd always seen as the perfect 1950s housewife, had wanted to be a doctor, like me. She'd given up her dreams for a man who thought he owned her body. I thought about all the times she'd asked me about medical school, lived vicariously through my achievements, and now I understood why. That's not true, grandfather insisted, but his voice was weaker now. Eleanor pulled out another paper, this one newer, her journal. She gave it to me before she died. Want me to read the entry about how she felt on her wedding night, when you told her the exact same thing you just told Melissa? Stop, I said quietly. Just stop, everyone. I looked around at the remaining guests, about half the original crowd. My grandmother is gone. We can't change her story, but I'm here, living my life, with a man who sees me as his equal, not his property. I took Daniel's hand. And if you can't celebrate that, then you shouldn't be here. Grandfather finally seemed to deflate. I was just trying to help. Marriage is hard. The divorce rates are lower among educated women who marry later, Jessica interrupted, her phone already out with statistics pulled up. And marriages based on equality and mutual respect last longer than traditional marriages. Google it. My cousin Michael, who'd been silent until now, stood up. Grandpa, I'm gay. My husband and I have been together for 10 years. Whose body belongs to whom in our marriage? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Grandfather's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He hadn't even known Michael was married. That's different, grandfather stammered. Michael's husband James laughed. Why? Because we're both men? So we're equals by default? That's actually proving everyone's point. You only think ownership applies when there's a woman involved. Daniel's mother Grace reappeared in the doorway with a small suitcase. I went home and packed. Anyone know a good hotel? My Aunt Patricia immediately stood up. You can stay with me. I have a guest room. Several other women started offering Grace places to stay. Phone numbers, lawyer recommendations. The solidarity was spontaneous and powerful. Richard appeared behind Grace. This is ridiculous. We're going home to discuss this like adults. Grace didn't even turn around. Richard, the only thing we have to discuss is divorce terms. And Daniel? She looked at her son with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry you had to learn about your father this way, on your wedding day. I already knew, Mom, Daniel said quietly. I remember the bruises. I remember the excuses. I was 12, not stupid. The admission clearly shocked both his parents. I promised myself I'd never be like him, that whoever I married would be my partner, not my property. Eleanor had made her way over to me, moving slowly but deliberately. Your grandmother would be so proud of you, she whispered. She wanted to leave him so many times, but the fear of scandal, of poverty, of losing her children, it trapped her. But you're free. Stay free. Grandfather was standing alone now, even his supporters having abandoned him. I don't understand this world anymore. he said, looking every one of his 88 years. Everything I was taught, everything I believed about marriage and family, was wrong. I finished for him. It was always wrong, Grandpa. Grandmother just couldn't tell you. I picked up Eleanor's stack of papers from the table, but she told Eleanor. She told her diary. She lived a lie for 60 years because you thought you owned her, and she died without ever being free. The DJ, who'd been frozen at his station this whole time, suddenly spoke up. Should I play music or? The absurdity of the question in the midst of family destruction made several people laugh, breaking the tension slightly. Daniel nodded. Yes, play something. This is still our wedding. As music filled the space, the remaining guests slowly began to move, some toward the dance floor, others to the bar that definitely needed reinforcing after this disaster. Linda was at a corner table with Caitlin and Amy, the three of them deep in conversation with Grace. The beginning of something, maybe. A support group born from catastrophe. My father approached Grandfather carefully. Dad, let me drive you home. But Grandfather shook his head. I'll call a taxi. I know when I'm not welcome. He started toward the door, then stopped and turned back to me. I hope you never need the wisdom I tried to give you. But when your marriage fails because you wouldn't submit, remember this moment. My marriage won't fail, I said firmly, because it's built on respect, not ownership. Because Daniel sees me as a person, not property. Because we communicate instead of dominate. Your way didn't create happy marriages, Grandpa. It created prisoners. And Grandmother's journal proves it. He left without another word. Eleanor handed me the journal, leather-bound and worn. Read it when you're ready. She wrote about you often, how you gave her hope that women could be different, could be doctors and wives and whole people all at once. The reception continued, smaller but somehow more genuine. The people who stayed were the ones who truly supported our marriage as a partnership. Stories emerged as the evening went on. My colleague Diane revealed she'd left her first husband for similar views. Daniel's cousin Patricia shared how her marriage became stronger when her husband started doing equal housework and childcare. Jessica gave a new maid of honor speech. To Melissa and Daniel, may your marriage be nothing like the marriages we saw destroyed tonight. May you always see each other as equals. May consent be ongoing and enthusiastic. And may you never, ever think you own each other. As we did our first dance, Daniel whispered, I'm sorry about my father. And yours, apparently. I looked over his shoulder at the half-empty reception hall. I'm not. Better to know who people really are. Better to start our marriage with truth. He spun me around, and I caught sight of the women's table in the corner. 4 generations planning their escapes. Your body belongs to you, Daniel said quietly. Today, tomorrow, always. That's my vow to you. I kissed him then, in front of everyone, and someone started clapping. Then another person, and another, until the remaining guests were giving us the standing ovation we should have had from the beginning. Uncle Stephen returned during the cake cutting, demanding Linda leave with him immediately. Security, who we'd hired for the reception but never imagined we'd actually need, escorted him out while Linda didn't even look up from her conversation with Grace's divorce lawyer. The cake-cutting photos would later show women in the background exchanging phone numbers and lawyers' cards. Caitlin caught the bouquet and in her speech said, I hope to find someone who understands that marriage is a partnership, not an ownership deed. And if I don't find that person, I'll stay single and happy, rather than married and imprisoned. The remaining older relatives shifted uncomfortably, but the younger crowd cheered. By the end of the night, 3 marriages had ended. 1 engagement was called off when the groom agreed with Grandfather's views, and a WhatsApp group called Escaping Traditional Marriage had been formed with 17 members. My wedding had become a revolution I never intended to start. Months later, I learned that Grandfather had been telling people I was divorced already, that my marriage couldn't survive my radical feminism. Meanwhile, Daniel and I were in couples therapy, not because we had problems, but because we wanted to make sure we never developed the toxic patterns we'd seen in our families. The therapist said we were her healthiest clients, working on prevention rather than cure. Linda's divorce was messy. Stephen tried to claim abandonment because she'd left at my wedding. The security footage of him grabbing her arm became evidence. She got the house and alimony. She started dating a man from her book club who cooked her dinner and asked her opinion on everything. Grace's divorce was faster. Richard didn't contest it, too proud to fight for a woman who'd publicly rejected him. Daniel helped his mother move into her own apartment, her first time living alone at 43. She went back to school, finishing the degree she'd abandoned when she married Richard. Grandmother's journal was published as a blog by Eleanor, with each entry showing the slow death of a woman's spirit in a marriage where she was property, not a person. It went viral. Thousands of women shared their own stories of marriages that looked perfect from the outside but were prisons within. Grandfather lived another 2 years, increasingly isolated as the truth about his marriage spread through the family. He died alone in his apartment, found by a neighbor 3 days later. At his funeral, Eleanor read a final entry from Grandmother's journal. If I could tell young women anything, it would be this. Your body is yours. Your life is yours. Don't let anyone, not even someone who claims to love you, tell you otherwise. The reception hall where we got married now has a photo from our wedding in their office. Not of Daniel and me, but of the women's table. 4 generations planning their freedom. The owner said it reminds her that sometimes the best thing to come from a wedding isn't the marriage that's beginning, but the ones that finally end. Daniel and I celebrated our 5th anniversary last month. He still asks before he touches me, still sees my career as equally important as his, still does half the housework without being asked. When people ask for our secret, we tell them about our wedding day. how watching marriages implode around us taught us exactly what not to do. My cousin Rebecca named her daughter Margaret, after our grandmother. But this Margaret is being raised to know her body is hers, her dreams are valid, and her worth isn't determined by her willingness to submit. She's 3 years old and already says no with confidence that would have shocked our grandfather. At family gatherings now, the older men are quieter. They've seen what happens when their true beliefs are spoken aloud. The women are louder, no longer asking permission to speak. And everyone knows the story of the wedding where everything fell apart and somehow led to something better being built from the ruins. Sometimes I reread grandmother's journal, especially the entry from her wedding day. She wrote about my grandfather saying those same words. Your body belongs to me now. She wrote about crying in the bathroom, about the crushing realization of what she'd signed up for, about the dreams that died that day. But she also wrote about hope. Hope that someday, women wouldn't have to pretend. That someday, a granddaughter might stand up and say no. I was that granddaughter. At my wedding, in front of everyone, I said what she never could. My body belongs to me. And in doing so, I freed not just myself, but the women around me who'd been waiting for someone to say it first. My grandfather thought he was giving me wisdom about marriage. Instead, he gave me the opportunity to break the chains he'd put on 3 generations of women. The videographer had captured everything. Sometimes Daniel and I watch it, not the romantic parts, but the revolution. The moment Linda took off her ring, the moment Grace walked out, the moment I stood up to generations of oppression in a white dress and heels. It wasn't the wedding video we'd planned, but it was the one we needed. Last week, Amy called to tell me she's getting married. I'm putting a note in the invitation, she said. Anyone who thinks women's bodies belong to their husbands shouldn't come. Her father won't be invited. Neither will mine's father's memory. But Eleanor will be there, now 95, and still carrying truth like a weapon. Your body belongs to your husband now. 7 words that destroyed my wedding and saved my family. 7 words that revealed the rot beneath the surface of perfect marriages. 7 words that freed women who'd been prisoners for decades. My grandfather thought he was passing down wisdom. Instead, he lit a match that burned down everything built on the lie that women are property. And from those ashes, we built something better. Marriages based on equality. Relationships built on respect. Lives lived in freedom. My grandmother never got to be a doctor, but her story, revealed at my wedding, inspired 6 women to leave their oppressive marriages and 3 young women to pursue careers they'd been told weren't for wives. The wedding that should have been the beginning of one marriage became the end of several others. But every woman who left that night will tell you it was the best wedding they ever attended, because it was the day they finally heard someone say out loud what they'd been thinking for years. My body belongs to me. And once you hear that truth spoken aloud, in front of witnesses, in defiance of generations of oppression, you can never unhear it. You can never go back to pretending that ownership is love, that submission is marriage, that your body is anyone's but yours. My grandfather's words were meant to imprison me. Instead, they set us all free. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.